Okay, we are on.
Okay, and welcome to Mythical Monster Investigations. I am your host, Archimage, with my co-hosts.
Shadow or Fox.
And Zed, and we are very frightened at the lack of image on the screen
You
right now.
should be, because for this topic of dwarves, I got the most horrifying image to date from a horror
right.
film that just came out.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
I know what it
yeah,
is.
now everyone's
Oh,
getting
no.
it now.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
Look!
Yep.
Oh, it hurt my eyes.
Actually, it's a good segue to start, because the first thing we're going to do is we have to address something very important when talking about dwarves. Peter Dinklage is a bitch.
Okay, well, first, let's get that
sorry.
nightmare fuel out of our voice.
Appreciate it.
That's better.
But yeah, we're starting off with basically a rant because Peter Dinklage is a total bitch. And I say that.
This whole episode was just to call Peter Dinklage.
This is literally just out of rant.
No, it's not, but it's starting out that way. And believe it or not, I am going to segue. I'm saying this because Disney was definitely going to try to hire real people with dwarfism eventually for this Snow White movie, but Peter Dinklage came on a radio show and said it's so ass backwards that they're doing that. How dare they do that? And I'm sorry, he plays Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, and where Tyrion Lannister, he is absolute proof that actors are not the characters they play, because Tyrion Lannister was stoic, nobody could say anything, and he didn't give a shit about anyone's opinion. Where Peter Dinklage, with that one statement, proved that he's a fragile little boy who is offended and triggered by a damn children's cartoon. Which is why I'm calling him a bitch for several reasons. Another thing is because, as someone who is of German descent, what right does he have to shit on my culture talking about dwarves? I'm sorry, but dwarves are part of my culture, and they're not making fun of anybody. They're a mythical creature. They're literally a mythical creature who happen to resemble people with the condition known as dwarfism, you bitch. Frankly, piss off. And I have no problem saying that because his own community came after him for basically losing jobs. And it's also horrible because if you remember the original Snow White, the dwarves were the heroes.
So what
the prince didn't do much.
What I'm hearing is, Archimage, is Peter Dinklage appropriated your culture.
No, Peter Dinklage spit on my culture.
We gotta take back dwarves.
Yeah, you're damn right. We should. But that's the bottom point, is that, first of all, Peter Dinklage is a total bitch for being offended by a children's cartoon. And second of all, especially to be so triggered to think that it's ever supposed to be making fun of people with dwarfism. Because it's not.
My headcanon on why he did that is because you know how in the Thor Ragnarok movie, they cast him as a giant dwarf.
So he wanted a movie that showed his ego and representation of his size.
I bet you he was like, I don't want to play a dwarf anymore. I want to play a tall or regular sized person. And then they cast him as a giant dwarf just to screw with him, and he got upset.
I could see that, actually. That'd be hilarious. I don't know. It sounds too clever for Disney.
I don't know. It sounds petty enough for Disney, though.
That's true. That is very true. All right. With that complete waste of time done, we're going to do what Peter Dinklage clearly didn't do and actually look into the history of dwarves and try to see where the actual myth about this magical creature came from. So with that being said, the popularity of dwarves, besides Snow White, while Snow White is known, its popularity, especially nowadays, mostly comes from the works of J.R.R. Tolkien and the famous Lord of the Rings. Tolkien's influence on, fantasy culture can not be, undervalued or understated. And his whole description of dwarves has basically really defined what they are to this day. Whenever someone thinks about dwarves, they don't think about, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. They don't think about the CGI abominations we recently got. They think of Gimli or Thorin. They think of the Lord of the Rings characters that Tolkien provided and brought to life in his novels, and which has really flooded the fantasy genre, going from various things like World of Warcraft to various other video games that my two co-hosts probably know a lot better than I do.
Warhammer, baby.
Wait,
My thought immediately goes to the Skyrim dungeons.
Warhammer is different
There
from
you
World
go.
of Warcraft?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I thought that was a nickname for the game. So wait, they're two
No.
different games?
No, those are two different franchises.
Yeah, way too different.
Oh,
Two vastly different. Not even same studio, as far as I'm aware.
okay, got it. All right, well, there you know. But Tolkien's influence, very easy seen. Because of that, that's where we get this image of a dwarf being a short, powerful, bearded man carrying an axe or a hammer, ready to fight or ready to go into the mine. Either one, we see him as a great bearded warrior, which, again, has basically propagated through all sorts of media, games especially. Now, Tolkien was a very big fan of mythology, and he wanted to stay as close to the original description of dwarf as he could. Now, sticking with the mythos, whenever we've been looking at, source material or trying to find the source of dwarfs, we usually try to start with the name, because the name, generally, as we've seen throughout this series, is almost a description of what we're looking at, a good description of what the creature actually was. However, with the dwarf, it's not really going to work because, unfortunately, the name of the dwarf is literally so old, no one exactly remembers what it means. They have theories, they have disputes, but dwarf is too old for us to have a very clear set definition on what it is. However, of course, it has come to be defined as meaning short people, especially considering that dwarf is part of a medical condition known as dwarfism. And as the name implies, dwarfism is a condition where a living being is inflicted with short stature. In humans, this means a person's height is in between 4 or 5 feet tall and characterized with short limbs or torso. Seeing as the word dwarf is literally in the condition's name, it's easy to understand how most people would assume the term was always used to describe the individual. Now, this is not a bad idea, but there's actually no proof of this. Believe it or not, there is no verification that there was a link between dwarfs and dwarfism beside the name being used. There's no proof that the original dwarfs of Norse mythology were actually supposed to be describing these dwarfs. And the reason that is oddly enough, when you look at Norse mythology, it never actually says that the dwarves are short. Which I know is strange to think about, but Norse mythology doesn't actually describe dwarfs short. What they are said is they're said to be powerful, they're said to be great craftsmen, they valued precious metal, they lived deep in mountains, and they loved digging for more wealth. And oddly enough, their origin doesn't actually give ideas of being short either, though one of their origins is bizarre. So origins are actually, dwarves are said to have come from maggots upon the body of the giant Ymir. So yeah, they were said to literally be born of maggots that were on Ymir, one of the Norse giants. Comment? Anybody? Do you want to comment on that?
Not the weird explanation I heard for a birth of a creature. I mean, half of the Greek creatures came from the blood of Medusa.
That's true.
I mean, what was it?
The other
Medusa?
half came from a giant snake screwing another snake, so
And I think also some blood, some of Cerberus blood also caused.
Yeah. And Aphrodite was supposed to be born of Uranus's testicles,
Yeah, that fell to the ocean after Kronos gave him a very close circumcision.
which would, I guess, technically make Aphrodite older than Zeus.
And that all depends on which interpretation you read.
Yeah, you know what? Let's not dive down Greek mythology's like whole rabbit hole because, like I said, like we've covered enough Greek mythology to know that we'd be stuck there forever. Um, so where was I going with this? So that's the thing, though. In Norse mythology, the dwarves are never really described as short. That actually comes later on. Now, why does that come later on? Well, one theory is that some statements, some stories in Norse mythology have said that dwarves were a form of dark elves. And dark elves were supposed to be malformed and misfigured creatures, as well as mischievous creatures as well. So it is considered that maybe this term of misshapen might have led to tales of other people that were also considered misshapen, like people with dwarfism. But there's no way to verify that. I mean, maybe it's possible that there is some link, but it's a chicken and egg scenario. In this case, the word dwarfism is definitely derived from the word dwarf, meaning smaller than norm, but that wasn't till later. So if a if a dwarf or a person with dwarfism inspired the legend of dwarf, there's no connection. It looks like instead the name just eventually meant to side with the medical condition more than anything else.
Could it
So, sorry, go ahead.
could it have came from the fact that I'm assuming the two dwarves who made Thor's hammer are some of the earliest Norse named dwarves to come
Actually, I think there were earlier ones with weren't the ones with that Sigurd went after earlier, Farnir, or
which
or
one?
did Sigurd come after Thor?
What did Sigurd do with the dwarves?
Uh, well, no, Sigurd. Well, Sigurd. Remember, Sigurd killed the dragon. The dragon was supposed to be the dwarf Farnir after he made the golden ring and took it for himself and became a dragon, which is what Tolkien based the One Ring off of, actually.
Um
But I'm not gonna lie, I haven't looked at the time structure of Norse myths as much as I should have. Um, so I'm not sure, but let's, for argument's sake, that say that the ones with Thor were earlier. What point were you going with?
Well, with Thor, they made the several rare items for them in competition. One of them being Thor's hammer, which the one where the handle was made too short because of Loki playing tricks on them. I'm
Yes.
wondering if the handle being made short, somehow then lead to dwarves being short.
It's not impossible,
That's the
but
only
didn't they give an
mythos I can think of
explanation?
where
But they said that Loki tricked them into making the handle too short,
I
though,
know,
right?
but it's very possible. That's the only mythos I can think of where dwarves and short are
Comes
in
into
the are
relation.
in the same like main part of the story. And I'm just thinking because of how stories are passed down, is it possible the original mythos didn't be something like they were short, like they was as short as the handle that they made for Thor, or maybe even so far as Loki tricked them and that's why they're short, or
I mean, it's not impossible because that's the thing. Norse mythology doesn't provide a lot of clues. And actually, speaking of which, you actually bring up a good thing with them making Thor's hammer. They were said to be great blacksmiths and craftsmen. Now, here's the problem with it. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at being a blacksmith, but it's a very difficult job, and dwarfism wouldn't actually help that very much. Now, while it's very possible that there were dwarf craftsmen, hell, there could be dwarf blacksmiths today for all I know. Um, it seems unlikely enough that there were enough dwarf blacksmiths to make a stereotype that, dwarfism and short, people who are of shorter stature would go with blacksmiths. Like, I don't think there'd be enough of them to make some kind of stereotype for that. Just saying, because again, blacksmithing is a hard job. Like, it's not easy, and someone with dwarfism, with shortened limbs, it doesn't seem like it would be very useful in terms of being a blacksmith. Know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think where that has come from.
Although there have been tales of blacksmiths being deformed, like going back to Greek mythology with what's his name?
Hephaestus.
Hephaestus. But again, they never said he was short, just malformed.
No,
so
he wasn't short. He was
he was a big guy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they specifically referred to him. They say he walked with a limp because he fell from Olympus, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
He definitely wasn't short because he was the son of Zeus.
Yeah, he was just supposed to be ugly.
Yeah, no, he was ugly and hairy.
Yeah. Which, that's a reason to throw your kid off a mountain.
I mean, chunk it. Yeah, I mean, hey, look, Sparta got rid of their kids for much less reason than that. So, I mean,
That's true.
Look. No, you know what? I'm not gonna say.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say because that's gonna set some people off. I had to catch myself there.
Well, at least you can catch yourself on something.
I mean,
but
more than the Spartan did with those babies. Oh, I'm sorry. That was right there. I had to make that one.
Oh God. So yeah, my point is blacksmithing. Like, there's not enough. I don't believe that it's feasible that there were enough short blacksmiths to create this stereotype with it that could possibly have contributed to this legend of dwarfs, being short. Also, in terms of searching for treasure, you could think, well, if you have a smaller size, it's easier to go into mountains, crevices, and search for treasure. Well, no, not really, because we have examples of ancient copper mines and ancient mines from various different areas. And as we see, they're actually very wide open spaces, and they're made for people of, well, at the time, normal heights. They're built in with normal stairs. They have a rocky surface, and they're very basic, large open spaces for copper mines, because the thing is, you needed people to go in and take out the precious metals and everything else. So again, it doesn't seem like any type of environment where a stereotype of shortness would somehow perpetrate into the public psyche of the time. At least not from my opinion. What do you guys think?
I mean, maybe they thought the dwarves was going to fit into the tiny crevices in the mines or something.
Well, that's a thought, but most of them were just digging through it anyway and just wind it up. Because again, if you fit them through tiny crevices, they can't carry out much. So you need to widen it anyway. So it just seems redundant.
I mean, I'm reaching. I'm trying.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. Is that's the thing. You're reaching too, because again, that's the problem. We don't really have much on the dwarf, because again, Norse mythology itself doesn't actually make any direct claims that dwarves are short. So it seems to have just been a thing that kind of linked it with it eventually. Even in astronomy, where certain stars that are smaller are called white dwarfs. So it's something that got attached somehow. It's just not exactly clear how. So, but large quarries and mining out, blacksmithing's definitely out. Craftsmanship, defining that, dwarfism wouldn't be very easy. So it does look like dwarfism in itself might not actually add to the actual legend of the dwarfs, especially when you think about it through history-wise. So throughout history, dwarves have been viewed two different ways, and it won't surprise you that these two ways, they've either been feared, mocked, hated, or considered an affront to decency, or they've been revered, admired, respected, and almost obsessed about. Regrettably, the former is the more common throughout history. And before we look at a little bit of history into that, I think now's a good time to pause and let Zed take over for Who's That Monster Pokemon, which apparently he found it fairly easy to find one for a dwarf, which I'm not going to lie, surprised me.
Oh, it surprised me too, because I'll admit, when first looking at this thing, I'm gonna be honest, I just typed dwarf Pokemon and this came up. Because I knew of it and it was in my head, but it didn't fully click. But based off how it looks, based off of what it does, it more so fits with, I guess, the sort of modern fantasy dwarves in terms of being blacksmiths, and that would be the Tinkaton line of Pokemon.
That hammer is bigger than she is.
Exactly.
And what is the second one's hammer? It looks like it has two pieces folded around it, like it's not fully. Like, how is that even a hammer? It's like sheet metal that was started but never finished.
Basically.
So, ironically enough, in the world of Pokemon, this thing's hammer is made out of another Pokemon.
Wait, what?
There is an armored bird Pokemon named Corviknight, and these things are known for knocking them out of the sky and taking the metal from them to reinforce their hammers.
Okay.
So, that's a thing that this thing has done.
What? Again, Pokemon.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised Sonic didn't try to sue for looking like Amy.
Funny enough, I always call my Tinkaton Amy Rose.
But I think I did the same thing.
Okay, so I'm not crazy. Like, this has Amy vibes all over.
Oh yeah,
right?
Oh, completely.
That's her pinka hammer right all over.
I mean, okay.
One thing to note: most of the time they never talk about female dwarves, and I find it funny that this Pokemon would be the equivalent of a female dwarf.
Yes, because it's only female.
Yeah, you're right. They don't talk about female dwarves. In fact, in most of the Norse myths, the dwarves are male.
It's the beards.
You know, a lot of people complained about that. I thought Gimli was great in Lord of the Rings.
They complain that he jokes around. I'm like, I like that he jokes around.
Right?
As a kid, that made me want to get into it more.
Exactly. I'm sorry. I liked the jokes. You know, it made him seem more real. Like, all the others were, you know, at times a little too serious, which I know, serious crap going on. But, you know, the fact that you had this character who was just allowed to kind of make jokes and be a bit funny, I thought was really great. I thought it was a nice change of pace, and it kind of made the story flow, and it humanized them, which I know is weird considering he's a dwarf and an elf and whatever the heck Aragon was.
A ranger.
That lived, like, he was 86.
When? By the end of the book, or?
No, in the movie, when he's doing the march, he's 87 years old.
Oh, that's because he's part Numenon.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, which weird.
So the Numenons was a race of ancient Maine that was that was descended from the elves. So they had essentially that bloodline had extended lifeline of like being like the elves where they age slower. It just was very, very diluted by the time it got to Aragon.
Damn, do you think that's wrong? What's wrong with you and me?
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, you definitely got the Numenon height. I don't. They would call me the dwarf for Numenons. Maybe. Oh my goodness, I'm Gimli. I gotta get an axe.
How do you not have an axe already?
That explains.
I have an axe. How do you not have an axe?
I like to be alone in my dark room, holding all my treasure. It all makes sense. I'm a dwarf. I'm a Numenian dwarf. I'm a tall dwarf. It all makes sense.
Why at a weird level does it make sense?
why I
Wait a
like.
minute. Numians weren't elves, so what the hell does that make me?
No, they were descendant of elves essentially. If my memory served correctly, they was like the third or fourth generations of the breed between elves and humans.
So
That's
so what? Numians were what? They were supposed to look like elves?
no, they were so they were supposed to look like Maine. They were like a off breed of Maine and elves essentially, where and let me
So
double
I
check.
look like an off-breed of man and elf.
You're tall enough for off breed.
God damn it.
Let me double check because if I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure that they was because they definitely did live long enough to be like elves half the time.
That's true. And you and I are aging uncomfortably slowly.
Yeah, which kind of summed them up. So
Yeah. I mean,
because
hell, we don't even have gray hair yet.
yeah, because okay, so I'm not wrong. Yeah, because that's what happened was some of the elves broke off from the other elves that lived with the gods, and they decided to break off away from the gods, and they essentially formed their own place, and they became the Numenans. And then ultimately, the Numenans went and settled on Middle Earth and bred with a lot of the people and became regular humans because their blood got diluted so much.
Ah,
That's why
wonder where Tolkien,
that's why
wonder where
like
Tolkien got
Aragon.
that story.
Yeah, and that's why Aragon and all the old king can speak Elvis. Is because technically that was, I mean, they didn't like it, but that was essentially distant culture of theirs.
I really got to read the Silmarillion.
Yeah, it's pretty dense, but I remember getting into this when Rings of Power came out because I was very interested with
Yeah.
the overall world of Tolkien.
Yeah, say what you want about Rings of Power. It did get more people kind of interested in the mythology, though.
Yeah, too bad it didn't keep up with its own mythology.
No, too bad it didn't. But like, it did get people interested. Like, it got me interested. Not to the greatest extent, because well, I've been busy. But anyway, we're off topic. So Zed, did you have anything more you wanted to add to the Pokemon, or is that it?
No, it looks like a dwarf. It uses a hammer. That's about all I've got.
Got it. So like I was saying, with dwarves in real life throughout history, they have often either been feared or actually regarded. With the former being most common, let's take a look at an example where they were actually regarded. And a good look of that is actually back in ancient Egypt, where they were actually seen as very fortunate and blessed. They were given high rankings and positions. And the one that you're going to see for those of you watching on YouTube, which is a statue of one right before.
Oh, one before? Okay, we haven't got to the good guy yet.
No, we haven't got to the. What are you going to do when we talk about? You know what? We'll find out. We'll cross that bridge when we
I actually
come
wasn't,
to
but
it.
now I guess I will.
Okay. The picture before that of yes. So what you're seeing here is a man named Schneb. I probably butchered that name, but anyway, he was a high-ranking court official in the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. He was a dwarf in 2520 BC. He was a person of considerable importance and wealth who owned thousands of cattle, had 20 palaces, various religious titles, and was even married to a high-ranking priestess who was of average size, and he had 3 kids, even with a lavish burial. And the reason that he was revered is that in ancient Egypt, dwarves were actually seen as symbols of youth and good luck. Now, the symbols of youth is obviously because of their stature, as life expectancy of anyone with dwarfism remains unchanged for a normal human in most cases. Therefore, their characteristics would have been considered childlike just due to the fact that they had short limbs and were about the same stature. So they saw them as a way meaning that they never grew up or never would. And that apparently in the ancient Egyptians' minds linked them to Bes, who was the deity of childbirth, which was the for those of us watching on YouTube, the image Shadow R. Fox previously showed. And yes, this is Beth, the deity of childbirth. And for those of us watching on YouTube, you don't know how hard it was to find an image of this guy without a dick. Like, most of them have that, so I purposely managed to find one without it, and for some reason, Shadow R. Fox thought that was a little insulting to him.
So I fixed it for you.
Really? Dick Grayson?
I mean, I could have found Dick Van Dyke or something.
Zed, any comment?
No.
No, you're perfectly fine with this?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Now, while ancient Egyptians revered people with dwarves, other cultures did not share the same reverence as them. For instance, in medieval times, they were often fools and used as playthings. Though it is to be said that acting as fools, they were actually able to learn various secrets and even position themselves in next to high-ranking government officials, learning a lot of things and even becoming trusted advisors. Though that was medieval times. In ancient Rome, they were little more than amusements, often being in plays or with actors or being basically amusing house servants. And unfortunately, they would come with all the less than good things that accompany being a slave. So oftentimes they'd find dwarves that were malnourished, had various bruises and other things on their wrists, everything you can imagine. So basically, what I'm saying is that you have several accounts of people with this condition being treated both poorly and being treated fairly well. So it just depends. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that this is where the problem lies with the entire origin in the terms of the mythos of the dwarf. Is this condition has existed for more than 5,000 years. So why would there really be a mythos around it? Because when you think about it, like when we've gone through this series, why do myths start? Like, why do these stories start? Myths are often told when a story is told, it gets exaggerated, and it's normally because the subject matter is uncommon. It's not enough to be known by a vast majority of the population. Now, dwarfism is not the most common medical condition in the world. I admit that. But it has been encountered enough for an average person to at least have heard of an individual with this condition. So, considering these types of people were normally present in royal courts or around high nobles or anything else, it seems unlikely that people wouldn't have at least heard of them in some fashion, which means the knowledge of individuals with dwarfism seems to have been enough to where it really wouldn't need an exaggeration into a mythos, which again, bear in mind that the Norse mythos of dwarfs didn't particularly have them as short anyway. So how did the dwarf come to represent a person with like shortened physical stature? And that's a really difficult question to answer. Maybe mistranslation or cultural differences are to blame. Legends primarily from Norse mythology and German cultures. It is in German poetry, not in Norse mythology, the well-known form of the dwarf appears. The dwarves of heroic strength, despite their small stature, perhaps. However, it's not a consistent theme. So, dwarves in these tales could also bear a childish appearance. Maybe that had something to do with it. Some were actually barely taller than the average person's knee, which would put them at roughly 2 feet tall. So at that point, they would look more like hobbits than dwarfs. But they still kept the great craftsmen, living in mountains, possessing some form of magical power, things like that. Dwarves could also be helpful, or they could be mischievous in many of the myths that we've gone over. And they've been a recurring theme of Hollywood and modern media, and the legends has been distorted for basically entertainment purposes. So it's hard to really pin down anything when it comes of it. And again, when it comes to the medical branch, it very well could be the popularity of J.R. Tolkien's narratives that led to dwarfs being associated with that and eventually being called dwarfism, but I sincerely doubt it. So, how did this legend start? Well, it's not impossible that in Germany there once lived tribes of people who were typically shorter than the average person of the time. That maybe the instance could have occurred. I mean, we have that today in Africa. They have tribes of what they call pygmies, who are people of a very short nature, and the entire tribe is inflicted with that. They're perfectly happy, but they're short. And usually their average height is around 4 feet 11 inches. And this happens in various tribes. The opposite has also been reported. Famously, when Ponce de Leon sailed to Florida in search of the Fountain of Youth, he was said to have found it, but he came across a tribe of people who were about 7 feet tall, including their leader, whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I will butcher it. But you can actually go visit the acclaimed Fountain of Youth and have a bit of a sample. I went there, tried the water, little grainy, but I didn't get any younger. So maybe I just didn't drink enough. But you can drink some of the Fountain of Youth, and the tour guide drinks the water every day.
And he's been the tour guide for how many centuries?
When I started, he'd only been there for a couple of years.
So, a couple of centuries. Got it.
Are you planning of trying to steal the Fountain of Youth now?
I mean, I like to think I have it already.
Fair enough. But like I said, so it's not impossible that a tribe of shorter than average people existed. The great craftsmen could have been a cultural aspect of the tribe. Actually, we mentioned the city-state of Sparta earlier, where they were known as the breeding ground of warriors. And if you weren't a warrior, you were killed. And Spartan society was primarily focused on warfare, so it trained every citizen to basically be a soldier. So there are ways that stereotypes like this can be done. And we see that even today. Detroit is considered a car manufacturing place because so many cars, well, at least used to come out of there before it went down the shitter. And it was known as the car capital of the world. So everyone who worked there was thought to have been part of the auto industry. So there are ways this could have come about, but that's the thing. It's all kind of circumstantial. I mean, it could be exaggeration of true events. Maybe there was a person born with dwarfism. He wasn't expected to do much. And he went on to do great things. Later on, becoming a dwarf, great tales. Maybe it was insults. Like, it's hard to say exactly where this came from. But the fact is, in Norse mythology, since they aren't actually described as short, it's very possible that this is just things that we've inferred, and it's actually been mixed with other creatures, because Norse mythology also had tales of creatures that would be more feverish and troublesome, which is actually something we're going to look at next time when we take a look at fairies, elves, and goblins. But for that, I don't know. What do you guys think? Because I couldn't get a very clear marking on what really inspired the legend of the dwarf. Do you think it could have just been perhaps a tribe, or maybe it's just been a misinterpretation of people who actually existed that later somehow became a euphemism for short people?
I mean, people thought the Amazonians was fake, and then we started finding that there could have been easily a tribe of mostly females,
That's true.
nomads. So I mean, how unlikely would it have been? Because we know that for the longest time, if you were born with any type of physical ailment, especially dwarfism, you were seen as it was seen as like your parents or someone had sinned against the gods or angered the gods, and oftentimes that child would be ostracized, if not outright banished from the community. So who's to say that maybe a lot of dwarves or people born with dwarfism wasn't banished from their communities and they formed their own community? And I mean, the best place to have formed these communities would have been in those mine, in an abandoned mine, because it's an empty shelter that's already dug out
That's true.
that you could live in, and it would provide you shelter from the weather. So that's where that could be easily with the mythos of they work and live in the mines. Maybe they just went into abandoned old copper mines or iron mines and used those as
Nothing to do.
homes. Yeah.
Nothing to do all day. You could work with jewelry, become fine craftsmen. I mean, especially if you have nothing but that, make a living doing that. Yeah,
Well,
no, that's possible.
if they formed their own community, they would have to be their own craftsman to
Yeah,
get
exactly.
to get things, tools and stuff. So
To trade things, start trading with people.
the warrior thing could easily been the few who decided to become mercenaries, um, because I think one thing that I think of would be the dwarf ranger from Warhammer. It's exactly what you sound, a dwarf scout essentially, and that would be a good position for someone with dwarfism to have, because if they spent most of their time living off in the woods, so away from shelter, they could easily probably sneak around just because of their status. They are small, they're probably gonna be harder to see in the forest, especially if
Yeah.
they are
So
used to being in there. So that could
yeah,
be
so
where the warrior
in a
came from.
military, yeah, in a military term though, they'd be more useful as like scouts than actual soldiers because a lot of people with dwarfism, have shortened limbs where running and charging in those type of ancient battlefields would not be their strong suit.
Well, yeah, and that's why I said ranger scout
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. Though it is important to kind of distinguish. So I'm not sure if this is like racist now to say, which it might be, but you know what? I've always been fuck PC culture. So if anyone's offended, well, you know what I think of Peter Dinklage. So be offended. Um, is that they used to say, what's the difference between a dwarf and a midget? And the difference is proportions, is that the midget was properly proportioned, where a dwarf suffering from dwarfism often is not. So bigger head, limbs can be a little off, which we saw with some of the pictures. So like the pygmies from when we looked at the pygmies earlier, they were definitely shorter, but as you could see, their proportions were pretty on par. So they might not have a problem running everything else. In fact, they probably have to be if they're surviving in the African jungle in the first place to be able to hunt and everything else. So again, it might just have to do with there might have actually been a tribe like this because I believe we actually discussed this once about the king who like literally bred an entire regiment of giants, right?
Yeah, the wasn't it Prussia or someone who did that?
Yeah, the Prussian giants. That was it. Was it Prussia or was it Austria?
Um,
I feel like it was Prussia.
I think, I mean, Prussia is the one that they say most countries have a military, but Prussia military has a government type deal. So
Yeah, it was Prussia. The Potsdam giants.
yeah, Postum.
Okay, Prussian. Just because, well, because the king had a fancy for some weird ass reason. So
Well, the king was average height. Well, he was below average height technically.
so he wanted to be surrounded by a military full of giants.
Well, they think the king was 160 centimeters, so that's 5 feet 3 inches in freedom units, and his Prussian soldiers had to be over 6 feet tall,
Yeah.
or 188 centimeter for those non-freedom people out there.
Right. So, hey, Zed and I would qualify. Which,
Well, you would never see any combat because he didn't want his giant unit to get wiped out. And this was during the time of Napoleon-like combat where everyone stood in a giant line together and there was cannonball fires. So bigger you are, the easier of a target you was.
yeah, pretty much. And let's also not forget some of the deadliest warriors on the planet were the Gurkhas who only stood at 5'3" or shorter. So, like, short stature's not, maybe that's a combination of dwarf where short stature could actually be beneficial to being a warrior because, as you just said, bigger targets. So it's hard to say. Maybe it was a combination of things. Maybe it was misinterpreted. Maybe there was a tribe of great craftsmen and warriors that happened just to be short. Who knows? This is one where you're just going to have to kind of make it up for yourself. And of course, if you would like a more in-depth look at the information on dwarves, you can always find it in the book Probable, Possible, Plausible, an Explanatory Guide to Monsters and Myth. And I'm afraid that's all I've got, other than another rant about Peter Dinklage being a bitch.
I've been
Anything
trying
else?
to resist the urge of putting a picture of Oompa Loompa in there and somehow figure out how to work this into the conversation. So
You mean I actually managed not to like steer you away from putting Oompa Loompa in here?
I was trying really hard because I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna offend something by doing. However, I could get Oompa Loompa joke in here.
I'm amazed I prevented that. Or was it just you were trying very hard?
I was every joke I came up with. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like not even demonetized. This is gonna get our channel banned. So let me just not make that joke, and let me not make that joke.
Oh, with that delightful potential, anything else you guys want to add?
CG dwarves are abomination, apparently.
Yeah, we all knew that was coming.
Not snow. Not so much snow. Snow. Hang on, I got it. Snow, not so white. And the 7 abominations. I don't think they'll beat the original. So
I was gonna say Snow Not So White and the 7 Hagrid PSIs.
yeah, they look weird. They really do look weird.
Yeah.
In the sense of they don't even look. I'm gonna pull them up. This will be what we'll close on because they really don't. Now that I'm thinking about it, they don't look like people with dwarvism, but they do have disproportional sizes in the strangest of ways. Like Dopey's nose and ears are huge, which I guess is more on point with the original.
You know what they look like? They look like a kid took a picture from a newspaper, put silly putty on it, and then started stretching out the faces on the silly putty. That's what it
Yeah,
looks like.
because when you compare them to the original,
Like, yeah, they're cartoons. You can get away with that, but when it's done with CGI, it looks off.
I would prefer at this point if they had did the same thing they did with the Hobbit dwarves.
Right? I was actually thinking the same thing. Like, grab normal sized people and just make them look shorter.
Yeah, I would.
Because you got to give credit. They made them look short because, like, Richard Armitage, who is an actor I really like, he plays Thorin, and he looks shorter than Gandalf. And they did it by giving them, like, prosthetic limbs and everything to make them look thicker, therefore to make them look smaller. And in fact, Richard Armitage is 6'2", where Ian McKellen, who plays Gandalf, is I think 5'10" or 5'11".
And the beers, Doc's and Grumpy's beers look fake because of how white they are.
Yeah, they really do. Okay, I was right. He's Gandalf is 5'11". And yeah, he looked taller than 6'2" Richard Armitage. So you got to give props on the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series. You know, their perspectives with the movies and the actors' heights was really well done. Which I would have preferred if they did that, to be honest.
Just the more I look at them, the more it's like uncanny valley because their beards, because they don't have any like facial hair of like mustache or anything like that, and it's just they got like a sideburn straight into a beard that look kind of weird and off-putting.
It looks like the beard is from a costume
It
costume.
does.
That's what it does. It looks like that.
And that's like cartoon, you can get away with that, but that does not translate well to 3D and CG.
No, it really doesn't. It's all kinds of uncanny valley and just strange. Yeah, well. Well, that's and to be fair, while Peter Dinklage is still a bitch for this, he's not the only reason the Snow White movie failed. It's also Disney being stupid and Rachel Zegler not learning to close her damn mouth.
And them not respecting the source material at all.
Yeah, that too. I was going that for Disney. But also, Rachel Zegler really needed to shut the hell up. That's not controversial to say. Literally everybody agrees with that. Like, even her fans who are trying to defend her are going to themselves, yeah, she really should have shut her bloody mouth.
Well, no, the director's son basically came out and he blasted her by saying how, you know, his father had to go halfway across the country to tell a whiny actor to shut up.
Yeah. And I believe that entirely. She looks like a spoiled, entitled brat, and everybody saw that. And that's the thing. This movie might ruin her career. And honestly, I think it'd be the best thing for her because, well, I never advocate for people to lose their jobs because I know what that's like. Honestly, if she's forced to basically quit Hollywood and get a real job, it might turn her into a better person because if she's this obnoxious without any really big significant hits under her belt, imagine what she'd be like if she actually got a hit movie. Like, if she's this much of a spoiled brat, imagine what would happen if, like, she got an actual hit on her side.
I'm just still thinking about those dwarves.
All right, I think that's a good place to end this.
Yeah. See y'all
All
next
right.
time.